go live button. I'm already alive, thank you very much. But go online, I suppose, doesn't have the same excitement to it. And that looks like it's up and running. Let's double check the monitor to make sure it's doing what it's supposed to. And it looks like it is. All right. So I think we are officially ready to get started. So good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for joining me for our next discussion of the book of Shemot. However, I'm going to cheat a little bit when we start off today, because we're going to start at the end of chapter 5 and into the beginning of chapter 6. Now, those of you who were with me for services over this last Shabbat may know that I pointed out that the beginning of chapter 6 really feels like a continuation of chapter 5, and that the break between chapter 5 and 6 is a little arbitrary. It's not ours, and that's not where the Torah breaks either. However, even when we get to where the Torah does break, into our new parasha of Vaera, it definitely still feels like it's continuing the conversation. So I'm cheating to make sure that in our study, we are able to begin with the main question from Moses, continue through God's answer, and then analyze what in the world this is all about. So you'll hopefully give me a little bit of slack. There are different ways to study and different ways to cut up the text in order to make that study possible. But to do so, I need to make sure that we're on the page for a couple of important foundationals, which is to say that we need to talk a little bit about God's name. God has a name, and God has many titles. And the book of Exodus is where we get the most extended conversation about those names and what was going to dominate our conversation today. But I want to make sure that we are familiar with at least a couple of them. One is the biggie, Hashem HaMefurash, the explicit name of God, the personal name of God, if you will, the Yud He Vav He, which we can see right here on the page in verse 22, which is usually pronounced by the word Adonai. We do not say that word as it is written, as it is a name that was considered to be only used for the most perfect of situations and settings. As such, we use a substitute word for the pronunciation, which is Adonai, meaning my Lord or my master. That's why you'll often see it translated as Lord when you are looking at a translation in many English books. The other big name that you'll probably be familiar with is Elohim. Elohim is, however, not so much a name as a title. It is definitely used as a name in the sense that it is referring uniquely to God, capital G, our God, Adonai, the same entity that the Yud He Vav He is pointing at. However, the word Elohim literally can also just mean God in the sense of G-O-D in English, meaning God. So, for example, when we are talking about the gods of the land of Egypt, those are Elohei Mitzrayim. Those are the gods of Egypt, which is the same word as Elohim, meaning our God. That can be a little confusing at first, but in English, we get over it by using capital G and lowercase g. In Hebrew, we just have to go off context. However, there are other names, such as El, which is the abbreviated form of Elohim, meaning God, and El Shaddai, which is a compound word, meaning both God and Shaddai, which is a little bit more confusing and complicated, and we've talked about it before, but generally it still is used to mean something along the lines of a God that is sufficient, or the God that says this is enough for the world, or many things along that way. You can also find Yah, which is the Yud and He taken from Yud He Vav He, as found at the end of the word hallelujah, so commonly used. All right, so God has lots of names, and that isn't even all of them, but those are the ones that you might come across the most often. Does it matter which one God's using at a certain time? Well, yes, How do we know that it matters? Because God makes a deal of it. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So without any further introduction, let's go ahead and get down to what the Torah talks about. And then we will go back to our commentators and share our thoughts on this. However, I just told a lie. There is going to be one more bit of introduction, which is telling you what's already happened before chapter 5, verse 22. We are dealing here with Moshe. This is the same Moses that had to flee Egypt and has now returned, but only after he had an encounter at a burning bush. And at the burning bush, God revealed God's self to Moses and gave Moses unique access, as we will review, to the Yud-He Vav-He name, the Adonai name. However, as we're going to see in chapter 6, that doesn't seem to be the end of the story. And don't worry if you don't remember that section from the burning bush. We are going to review it when we get to our commentary. Okay, so Moses has shown up. He has gone to Pharaoh. He said, hey, my people need to go. And Pharaoh said, no, I don't know your God. Why should I do this? And Moses said, because I asked, and no. And instead of letting them go, Pharaoh has now made life harder for the Israelites that are slaves, and they are a little annoyed at Moses for making things worse. And then in the end of chapter 5, Moses is now turning to God and lamenting what has happened. So, verse 22. Then Moses returned to the Lord, that's Yud-He Vav-He, and said, O Lord, now notice how this is lowercase, that is the actual word Adonai. Why did you bring harm upon this people? Why did you send me? Ever since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has dealt worse with this people, and still you have not delivered your people. All right, perfectly legitimate complaint. You told me to come, you told me to tell Pharaoh to go, and maybe you sort of mentioned that there would need to be some miracles and other problems, but yeah, you didn't tell me that things were going to get worse before they got better. Why am I bothering to do this? I'm only making things worse for the Israelites. Perfectly understandable. And then the next line, again, chapter 6 in most editions, but continuing at the end of the book of Shemot, the end of the parasha of Shemot for our official reading. Then the Lord, that's Yud-He Vav-He, said to Moses, you shall soon see what I will do to Pharaoh, and he shall let them go because of a greater might. Indeed, because of a greater might, he shall drive them from his land. Meaning not only will Pharaoh let them go eventually, he will do so in response to my power, and he will do so in a way that isn't just letting them leave, but is actually sending them out because of the terror that will be consuming him. All right. But even though that's the end of the parasha for Shemot, Vaera really is continuing that theme, at least in the minds of most commentators, as we carry on into chapter 6, verse 2. God spoke to Moses and said to him, I am the Lord, Ani Adonai. Right? Very straightforward, even more so in the Hebrew than the English. I am Adonai. Now remember, Adonai is a name as well as a reflection of God's essence. So it doesn't sound like God is merely introducing himself here. He is making a statement, a claim, by using that name. What that claim is, we'll have to talk about. But God goes on, I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as El Shaddai. Again, the other name that we mentioned. But I did not make myself known to them by my name, Adonai. Now here you can see the translation goes ahead and just leaves that with the Hebrew because they are trying to make the point that this is a little difficult to explain. Now, the idea of not making my name of Adonai known to them is something that grammatically should catch your attention. It is an awkward phrasing of that word, and one that we will have to loop back onto. The translator has tried to simplify it by make myself known to them, but really it is a little bit more subtle and complicated than that. As I have often said, I appreciate the difficulties of translating for people that can't read Hebrew to try and pick a English expression that will be acceptable. but sometimes it's just not easy to make it work. Verse 4, I also established my covenant with them, meaning the patriarchs, to give them the land of Canaan, the land in which they lived as sojourners. I have now heard the moaning of the Israelites because the Egyptians are holding them in bondage, and I have remembered my covenant. Excuse me, let me just scroll down here. Say, therefore, to the Israelite people, I am the Lord. Again, Ani Adonai, bringing us back full circle to that first line. I will free you from the labors of the Egyptians and deliver you from their bondage. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and through extraordinary chastisements, meaning through the implementation of justice against the Egyptians. Chastisement doesn't really have the right flavor in modern English, but we are talking about, as it says, the Beshif Fatim, that this is from the word shofet, meaning to judge. These are judgments against the Egyptians. They're not being chastised like a child. They are having a verdict leveled against them. And I will take you to be my people, and I will be your God, and you shall know that I, the Lord, again, Adonai, am your God, Elohechem. Again, this is a title rather than the specific name, who freed you from the labors of the Egyptians. I will bring you into a land which I swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I will give it to you for a possession. I, the Lord, Ani Adonai. Or you could say, I am the Lord again. Again, this is a difficulty of translation. In Hebrew, there isn't the am verb in the present tense in the same way there is in English. So sometimes translators have to choose whether or not it is saying I am the Lord or just I, the Lord, in this way. All right. So hopefully you've noticed the word Adonai appears very, very frequently, not just as a passing title, but as an explanation, as a description of God. And that is meant to convey more than just identity. For after all, we know, just to scroll back up here to our beginning, we know that God appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as El Shaddai, that was his identity marker for them, and that surely should be good enough for now. So why the need for the Adonai? Why is this additional emphasis on this special word referring to God? So that's what we're going to have to wrestle with in our commentary. Before we jump into the commentary, do we have any questions or comments that people would like to share off the bat? Okay, so first, let's do a little review. That is to say, we need to review what God has already told Moses and what we can then figure out from that. So going back to Exodus 3:13, this is back at the burning bush. Moses said to Elohim, that was the usage of God, the term at that point, when I come to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? So Moses at least seems to be in a quandary. How does he refer to God with a name? After all the Egyptian gods have names. He can't just say Elohim, because that just means God. And unlike in modern English, where the capital G God always refers to our God, Moses knows that just saying God is going to elicit a response of which God, since people were used to there being names for gods all around them. So what is his name? What shall I say? And God said to Moses, Ehyeh asher ehyeh, which is a very difficult term to translate, usually rendered as something of I will be that I will be, or I am that I am. There's a lot to be said about that, which we're not going into today. But it is from the verbs of that name that we then create the construct that will lead to the Yud He Vav He. God continued, thus shall you say to the Israelites, Ehyeh sent me to you. And Elohim said further to Moses, thus shall you speak to the Israelites, Yud He Vav He, Adonai, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This shall be my name forever. this my name for all eternity. All right, so back at the burning bush, we get a statement that the Yud He Vav He is the name that is going to be used, and that the Yud He Vav He has something to do with God's essence, this Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, and indeed you can see in the verbal construct and the verbs themselves that are used in the Torah in the Hebrew, how the conjugation is being used to create this notion of Yud He Vav He as a representation of God's essence. And there is a reminder that this is a continuation of the same God that has been the God for Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That even though this name seems to be becoming new, that this is a same God. By the way, the phrase Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov may sound very familiar in the Hebrew, because this, of course, is the citation, along with the many other places where this gets repeated, of the Avot in the first blessing of the Amidah, where we refer to God as the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Okay, but then we get a comparison with our verse that we just went over here in chapter 6. I am Yud He Vav He, I am Adonai. I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as El Shaddai, but I did not make myself known to them by my name, Yud He Vav He. I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, the land in which they lived as sojourners. So in 6:2, we seem to be given this name a second time, the Yud He Vav He, as being a revelation to Moses 3 chapters later, maybe. It seems a little incongruous. Additionally, we are being told that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob knew God as El Shaddai, which would mean that showing up with Yud He Vav He as a name to the Israelites might have been hard for them to accept if they didn't know that was the name of God, because they might have received a tradition that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was known as El Shaddai. So Exodus 6 seems to present some contradictions to Exodus 3. Moreover, is it even true that God did not appear with Yud He Vav He to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Because, as we'll see from this fine list, Abraham calls the name of Yud He Vav He multiple times in chapter 12, in chapter 13, in chapter 21, for example. And so does Isaac in 26, 27, 7, and 27, 27. And God uses the name Yud He Vav He when talking with Jacob, which is in 28. And Jacob uses it himself in 28, 16, 28, 21, 32, 10, 49, 18. Sarah, Leah, and Rachel, as well as Lavan, all use the name Yud He Vav He as well. And the citations are there on the screen for you. So in short, when we're looking at all these passages, it seems that the name Yud He Vav He was hardly a secret, and that it was well known to the ancestors. So when God says, I didn't reveal myself to them, I didn't make myself known to them by the name of Yud He Vav He, we should have a lot of questions right now, because we've got multiple instances across all of the generations of the patriarchs that are mentioned here, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, where Yud He Vav He was either in their mouth or used to them by God directly. And that means we're going to have to figure out what is going on with this name, and why is God making such a big deal of the Yud He Vav He now? And why is there any hint that perhaps this is a change from what Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob experienced? Questions or comments?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Can we make a distinction between appearing and speaking?
Yes, absolutely. And that's something that some of our commentators will try to pick up on, that there might be a difference between this appearing as opposed to the face-to-face communication of Moses. But the phrase that is used is, of course, that making myself known, and that idea of da'at, of knowledge of God. Are we trying to imply that they knew God differently in terms of like the content of the knowledge? Or is it merely the means of transmission that was different, like you're talking about with appearance? So there are some potential solutions that have to be examined. So let's go ahead and see what our first version of solution is going to look like, this time taken from Shemot Rabbah, from the Midrash. And I appeared to Avraham. The Holy One of Blessing said to Moshe, a pity on those who disappear and are not remembered. Many times I revealed to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov as El Shaddai, and I did not make myself known that my name is Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, as I told you. But also, they did not search for my attributes. Let me just make sure you understand the pattern before we dive into the examples between all three of the patriarchs. So what the Midrash is trying to say is that he was revealed, meaning connected to and appeared to them as El Shaddai, but he was not proactively making them aware of himself as Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh through the depth of what that actually would mean. Instead, he was hoping that they would search through the El Shaddai cover story, meaning through that initial contact, that they would search for more than what had been appeared, more than what was revealed, and find the deeper essence of God as Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. Again, reflecting that the Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh name is more of a name and less of a title than any of the other terms that we use to refer to God. But, says the Midrash, the patriarchs didn't dig deep enough. They didn't pursue to the depths that God was hoping. Let me give you the examples from the Midrash that establish that. I said to Abraham, rise, walk through the land, its width and breadth. He wanted to bury Sarah and did not find a place until he bought with money and did not search for my attributes. I said to Yitzchak, live in this land because it will be for you and your seed. He searched for water and did not find it. Rather, the shepherds of Gerar fought with the shepherds of Yitzchak. And he did not search for my attributes. I told Yaakov, this land you lie on. He searched for a place to put up his tent and did not find it until he bought it for 100 coins. And he did not search for my attributes. He did not ask me my name as you did. You, at the beginning of my sending you, asked, what is my name? And at the end you said, and since I came to Pharaoh, meaning that beginning of Moses's question. And regarding this, it is written, and I will also maintain my covenant that was given to them, as I said, that I will give the land to them, even though they did not search for me. All right, so this is a very difficult midrash, and let's walk through it, pardon the expression, from Abraham's journey, and try and unpack what God is trying to teach to Moses here. He seems to be saying, I reached out to Abraham, and I gave him the opportunity to live in the land, but he focused himself on the traditional ways of acquiring a place, of being in a place. That is to say, he bought real estate. He bought a place to bury his beloved Sarah. Not saying that that's wrong, says God, but that was a secondary concern. Had he wanted to know a place to bury Sarah, he should have explored my attributes. He could have found that through me rather than finding it through the real estate listings. I said to Yitzchak, live in the land and you'll have whatever you'll need. And he looked for water, but he looked for water rather than looking for me. He could have found me and water, but instead he was busy digging wells. Likewise for Jacob, I told him that this land belongs to you, but what does he do? He goes out and buys a place, in this case near Shechem, and settles it in the normal real estate manner, looking for it rather than looking for me. That both Abraham, or rather all Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov seem to be preoccupied, not in a horrible way, and certainly less than all of us, but in comparison to Moses, they seem to be more preoccupied with the needs of the land, the needs of themselves, the needs of this material world, than they are with finding everything they need through God. that God is not exactly secondary. That would be unfair, but God is maybe parallel to their focus and need for this world. Whereas Moses, says the Midrash, when I told you what to do, when I told you, hey, I'm meeting you, what did you say? You said, what is your name? I want to know more about you. And indeed, we see this repeated again by Moses on Mount Sinai when he has his experience with God in the cleft of the rock. He wants to know more of God's essence. He's not asking for real estate tips. He's asking to know God directly. That turns out differently than he probably expected, but that's a whole nother discussion. But that sets him apart from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Indeed, it's only after things in the world have begun moving that he begins to focus on, what do I do now with the people? What do I do now to fix Pharaoh and the situation? And it's at that point that God then goes back and says, yes, indeed, I will satisfy the covenant by bringing you to the land that I had promised, the covenant that was made with Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. So the first thing to understand is that it may not have been that God wasn't revealing as much or God wasn't doing as much, says the Midrash. It may be that the people just didn't get it when those early generations were experiencing God, that it wasn't a change of God, but a change of us. And that change happened with this guy, Moses, who put a completely different spin on the relationship that we would have. Thoughts and comments before we look at some alternative explanations for the name switching?
A thought, and it goes to the first verse that the first verse you started with today, 5:22, when Moses is really focused on the needs of the people. Mm-hmm. Why have you dealt so poorly with these people? Why have you sent me? Why are you dealing poorly with these people? And why haven't you delivered your people? His focus is on other people, not his own needs. And that makes Moses very different. So he needs different attributes, a different relationship, and has different needs.
Indeed, Moses is very distinct. While the different patriarchs did worry about other people, it does not seem like it was as all-consuming of concern, the same way that it was for Moses. We see Moses when he was going out the first time, when he was 40, being concerned with the abuse that he saw. We see him concerned when he finds Zipporah at the well. We see him concerned when he sees the burning bush. And we see him concerned when the people are not being freed. So that does seem to be a running characteristic of Moses, indeed. Next.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Going to say, you don't get up as a baby and run. Okay. I think there's a process involved. If God had revealed, he said El Shaddai, right? I mean, that gave like some element of what they were used to. And it's a progression. I see it as Moses is several hundred years later, right?
Correct.
So there's been this progression of, yes, I rise up and I walk, and then I, buy a piece of land. I mean, it's kind of just bringing them along like a child and watching them grow up. And then you have the one kid in the class who asks, wait a minute, what are your attributes? I mean, tell me more about you. I mean,
Right.
that's how I see it.
There is a definite spiritual maturity pattern that we could be seeing here. Exactly. But those aren't the only answers, because we have plenty of other commentators that like to look at things from different angles. So let's take a look at Rashi, always a classic to start with. But my name, Yud-He-Vav-He, I was not known to by them, right? It's an awkward phrasing, like I mentioned. It is not written here, I did not make known to them, although that's how most translations will render it, but rather, was I not known by them, meaning in a passive form. I was not recognized by them in my attribute of keeping faith, meaning the Yud-He-Vav-He is representative of God's eternal faithfulness, and they didn't recognize that, by reason of which my name is called Yud-He-Vav-He, which denotes that I am certain to substantiate my promise. For indeed, I made promises to them, but did not fulfill them, meaning during my lifetime. So Rashi takes it as being not exactly a shortcoming of God, but a shortcoming of the relationship, that God made promises regarding the Brit, the covenant, to the patriarchs that would set us on the path to becoming the Israelite people that we eventually know and love, but that wasn't finished during their lifetimes. And as such, they could not refer to God, they could not know God through the Yud-He-Vav-He title, because the Yud-He-Vav-He title requires a length of experience to see the promise given and the promise fulfilled over a broader stretch of time, to recognize the eternity of God and the mastery of all existence of God, that puts God into a different category than merely being a powerful God, and turns God into Adonai, that turns God into this Yud-He-Vav-He construct that allows us to understand God's essence and existence that far exceeds the other divine experiences that people might have had. So Rashi is saying it wasn't exactly our fault, and it wasn't exactly God's fault. It was too early in the relationship to use that term. It's like, when you're dating someone, and after you've had the first get together and you went to the movies and you had a nice cup of coffee, it's probably not time to propose marriage yet. Probably not time to say you love the person yet. Doesn't mean you won't. It just means you haven't seen enough of them to have that type of relationship just yet. By the time Moses comes around, we have more of an opportunity to have seen God's actions over the centuries, and thus Yud-He-Vav-He is now the appropriate version, and Yud-He-Vav-He is appropriate to the Israelites to say, remember the God that made all those promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Well, that God is here, and that God is making good on those promises. Yud-He-Vav-He, Ani Adonai, that is what it means to be Adonai. Thoughts or reflections, or shall we look at our next commentator? All right, let's get a little bit more. This is a longer Ibn Ezra text, but he is quoting from multiple people. Rabbi Sadia Gaon explains that there is a missing word, alone, in our text, so that the meaning of the text is that through my name, Yud-He-Vav-He, alone, I did not make myself known to them, but sometimes as El Shaddai and sometimes as Yud-He-Vav-He. So Sadia Gaon is trying to let us know that it isn't that God never was Yud-He-Vav-He to them. It's just mostly he was El Shaddai, and he didn't only make himself known through Yud-He-Vav-He. Now, Ibn Ezra is not going to be exactly happy with this answer, as he goes on to say, and of course we know that El Shaddai is the holy name, blessed and honored, and there is no distinction between them. The only thing is that Shaddai is an adjective, and Yud-He-Vav-He is sometimes a noun and sometimes an adjective. And behold, what do we make of it being written regarding Avraham? I am Yud-He-Vav-He that took you out of Ur-Kasdim. And regarding Yaakov, I am Yud-He-Vav-He, the God of your father Abraham, right? It still seems that whether or not he was using the name alone or not, that the name did seem to figure prominently in some of the incidents of the ancestors, of the patriarchs. So Rabbi Yoshua has a different explanation. He explains that Avraham and Yaakov didn't really know that name, that indeed Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh was unknown to them, just as Moshe wrote later. So that seems to make a problem, because that means that when God said, I am Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh that took you out of Ur Kasdim, that God must have not actually said that to Avraham, but instead something along the lines of, I am El Shaddai that took you out of Ur Kasdim. And Moses, when writing the Torah, substituted Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh for El Shaddai in some of the passages related to the patriarchs. Ibn Ezra is not happy with this. And Rabbi Yoshua's words are not correct. How could it be possible that Moshe wrote something that wasn't there? There is no doubt that the patriarchs knew this name as a noun, but this name as an adjective, they did not know. All right, so let's make sure we understand his critique of Rabbi Yoshua, which is pretty obvious, which is, okay, so Moses is writing down to the Torah, but would Moses have really swapped out words that wouldn't have been appropriate for the patriarchs at their time? And the implication is no, that would not be an edit that Moshe would have made. But how can we then square they knew Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, but they didn't know Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, as our verse in chapter 6 implies? Well, they knew it, but they didn't know it as an adjective. They only knew it as a noun, meaning they knew Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh as being the title of God, the name of God, like you might say Zeus or Thor, but that doesn't mean they understood what it meant, the adjective, the descriptiveness of this word. They just knew it as being God's name. The same way that if I meet someone and he says his name is Frank, I now know that his name is Frank as an adjective, as a noun, but I don't know what the frankness is about him. I don't know the adjective that frank means. What does it mean when I say that's a frank thing to do? The name, not the English noun. Sorry, bad choice of English word. I don't know that yet. And indeed, according to this interpretation, the patriarchs knew Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh just as God's name, the word that God used to describe himself, to distinguish himself from Zeus and Thor, for example. But that doesn't mean they fully appreciated the essence. And why? Behold, the patriarchs did not have the same level as Moshe regarding as clinging to Hashem, who knew Hashem face to face. Therefore, Moshe was able to change the natural laws of this lower world and make new signs and portents, meaning miracles, which the patriarchs couldn't. So his explanation is that Moses knew God on a different level, that God may have appeared to the patriarchs, but God was seen face to face, which is an idiom for a deeper level of understanding by Moses. And we have proof of that different level of understanding by the different level of action that Moses was able to take in this world, of the miracles God could perform through Moses, that far exceed the earth-changing power compared to the miracles that were done for Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Questions or comments before we look at the further implications of this? Okay, not seeing anyone unmuting or in the YouTube chat. Behold, Moses said two things. Was it for this that you sent me? And you haven't saved your people. Meaning our beginning in chapter 5. And God answered the second, meaning you haven't saved your people, with you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. Meaning, yes, I haven't saved them yet, but it's coming. And the first with I am Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. And the reason is that through the patriarchs, my name El Shaddai was known, and through your hands, my honored name Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh will be known. When he said, tell the children of Israel, I am Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, Adonai, and behold, I sent you to make this name known. That what was the purpose of God sending Moses? It wasn't to deliver the people. That was already covered by part 2 with you'll see what I'll do with Pharaoh. But Why did I send you? To reveal the Yud He Vav He in all of its form, not only as a title and a noun, but as a full adjective, as a description and understanding of God's essence. And that, Moshe, that was actually why I sent you. It wasn't just to get the people out of Egypt. It was also to reveal this essence of my name. All right, so that's Ibn Ezra's solution to this seeming contradiction between, did God reveal his name to the patriarchs or did he not? All right, let's take a look. We do have a few more explanations to wrangle with, and then we're going to see how this applies to a practical matter of Jewish law. I showed to the patriarchs that I was able to save them for their own good, but I did not make myself known in the essence of acting good and evil, which is taught by my name Yud He Vav He, since I did not do anything bad to them. And now that you ask, why are you doing evil to this people? I know that this is my way and this is my will, that Israel will recognize that I do everything, good and bad, so that they will hold me in awe forever. And the commentators explain, as Yud He Vav He, I keep my promises. So this notion of Yud He Vav He, with its long-term sense of fulfilling promises and absolute essence of existence, is reminding, or rather informing, the Israelites for the first time that this is not some duality. This is not a God that only does good and some other God does bad. This is a God that created the entire world. And yes, sometimes that means there will be bad things that happen. Sometimes there will be things that lead to suffering. And whether that be slavery or whether that be a hurricane, we don't ascribe that action to some other power. There's no other entity that's creating these things. This is the world God created, and it might be just playing out of natural cause and effect, much like a hurricane, or it might be a deliberate orchestration, much like the continued issues with regards to the plagues and the eventual liberation. But ultimately, you can't ask who did this. Ultimately, God created this world. And both the good and the bad have to be traced in one form or another back to God. Again, as I've said many, many times, but I always have to repeat it because people seem to misunderstand this with great frequency in the modern world. That doesn't mean every bad thing is God doing it on purpose to make your life bad. But it does mean there is nothing else in this world that is doing it on purpose to make your life bad. You cannot blame bad things on demons, angels, malicious spirits, or Zeus and Thor. Everything in the world ultimately is from God. All right, so that's Shaddai's explanation, is that there is a deepening of the relationship when we understand the long-term idea that there will be bad stuff and God will be with us through it, and God will be with us on the other side. And don't think that this is a battle between our God and their God, because their God ain't nothing. All right, and then Seforno gives us another relatively straightforward way of understanding this distinction. In effect, what God is saying is that he had not made a point of becoming familiar to the patriarchs by his attribute, Yud He Vav He, when appearing to them. This was because he never needed to change the laws of nature on their behalf. Seeing that the patriarchs could not have passed on knowledge about me, which I had not revealed to them, they in turn had not been able to pass on such knowledge to their children. I have to do this now in order to ensure that I can preserve the children of Israel as my people. So, very, very practical, says Forno. God wasn't Yud He Vav He to them because God never had to turn the world upside down on their behalf. Yes, there were miracles that helped them, and yes, the way that God appeared to them was powerful and sufficient. It was enough. But what God is doing now, the magnitude of what God is doing now, will irrevocably reveal God's existence as essence of all existence, and God as the architect of all of the world. And as such, that will become the true title, the true name that God should be referred to most reverentially from this point going forward. That there will be a proof of God in effect through this act, and that proof will surpass anything that the patriarchs experienced. All right, questions or comments on Shaddai Sforno before we jump into our practical implications? Okay, so it's a little early.
I
yes,
have
go ahead.
Okay. I have a observation, maybe. Doing evil can't be laid at Zeus or Jupiter or whatever, but it can be caused by our own free will, our own actions, not God.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
We're destroying forests and we're destroying seas.
Right. So absolutely, the classic understanding of the existence of bad stuff, of things that we don't like in this world, usually gets broken down into a number of understandings. One is that what we think is bad is not really bad. So when you miss the traffic light and have to wait, that's actually helping you because it's giving you more time to think. It's giving you a way to avoid the accident you would have been in. You only think of it as bad because you don't recognize the alternatives. And for much in life, we often complain about things not being as we want when we fail to realize that if we had what we wanted, it would be bad, right? Why didn't God make me rich? Well, because if I was made rich, I'd probably be doing stupid things with my money and would become a corrupt and bad person. So God is actually helping me by keeping me away from that lottery winning. So there's that aspect of what we think would be good would actually be bad, and we've been blessed by not having it. And then there is what we think is bad, but it's just, that's the way the world works, right? I'm losing hair. That doesn't mean God is punishing me. That doesn't mean God is picking on me. It just means that my genes and what it means to be a biological male and means I'm going to end up with male pattern baldness. Nothing personal and nothing evil going on there. As much as I would like a little more sun protection in the summer, it just is. And that's just part of nature. And indeed, things like the basic illnesses that we receive are very much in that same category. It's just the way the nuts and bolts of the molecules of the universe work together. If you throw a rock up, it'll come down on your head, which leads to the third category, which is a lot of the things that are bad happen because we do them to ourselves. We often behave badly, and then when we are suffering the consequences, we shake our fists at the heavens and say, why did you do this to me? But really, if you throw a rock up in the air, are you expecting that God's going to catch it and keep it from hitting you on the head? And parallel to that is the fourth and most common form, which is a lot of the bad in the world is bad that we've done to each other. If I punch someone else, I can't expect that God is going to protect them from my fist. I have free will. If I, like you mentioned, pollute the oceans, I have to expect that someone is going to suffer from that. Maybe not me, maybe my children, my grandchildren, or people in other parts of the world, but it will eventually happen. Free will demands that there be consequences to my actions, and that those consequences be predictable and regular. And that means that I am held responsible for my actions. And that is the price we pay for being a human with free will. But indeed, we don't need to lay any of that at the feet of God as causing it, but we can be reminded that God made all of it possible, that God created a world that is run by natural laws, that God created a world in which we often have difficulty knowing what is good and what is bad, that God created a world in which we and others have free will. Personally, I think that it's the best of all possible worlds. Pardon to Leibniz, although he got some other aspects of that wrong. But it is a world that allows for those things to happen. And as such, we don't need to point to any other deity or entity other than us for why they happen. And that is all part of God's creation. but it is our responsibility to make the best of it, which we certainly can do, and which we often don't do as much as we should. All right, let's get to the practical implication before we run out of time. It's one that hopefully is familiar but unfamiliar, which is because of these promises that God is making, because of this notion of God's eternity of Yud He Vav He and the essence of existence, because God wants to create good and turn the world upside down so that not only can there be Jewish people, but that his title, Yud He Vav He, will be known as an essence, not merely as a title. That means we celebrate the holiday of Pesach. And we celebrate that holiday most famously over 4 cups of wine. And those 4 cups, where do we get that idea from? Well, says the Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud, as well as the Babylonian as well. Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Rav, Rabbi Benaiah said, corresponding to the 4 salvations, meaning the 4 promises of salvation. I will free you from the labors of the Egyptians and deliver you from their bondage. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and through extraordinary chastisements. I will take you to be my people, and I will be your God, and you shall know that I, Adonai, am your God, who freed you from the labors of the Egyptians. So that passage that we read this morning from the beginning of Vaera is where we get the notion of the 4 cups of wine, so that when we lift them up at our Seder, and when we celebrate having this wonderful holiday, it's not only about being together with each other, it's not only about the food, it's not only even about the history. It is about learning the lesson from that history of God's nature and essence as being not only the source of all of existence, but the source that wants there to be redemption and salvation, that wants there to be an end of suffering, that wants us to understand the promises that God made to make the world a better place as part of the covenant, and maybe even remember our own part in that covenant and be reminded of our responsibilities too. So when we lift that glass, make sure you're lifting it with more than just a perfunctory turn of the wrist and more than just a little lean to the left, but instead recognize in this a great theological truth and an incredible spiritual moment that happens every year. Twice, in fact. Well, 4 times, 4 times 2, 8 in total. Any questions or final comments that people would like to share? All right. Well, thank you all very much. I greatly enjoy studying together, and I look forward to seeing those of you in Mishnah tonight at 7 o'clock or Pathways to Judaism tomorrow at 6 p.m. Take care.